Hi guys, I'm Charlie, a Charlie book fanatic. Welcome back to my channel, and today I want to talk about the books I managed to read in April. Believe it or not, I actually managed to read 10 books in April, which is my best reading month this year so far. The first book I managed to finish in April was actually on the first day of April, and that was Crooked Kingdom by Leigh Bardugo. This is the second and final book in the Six of Crows duology, and I actually have an entire vlog dedicated to this series. I will link it down below, and I won't go into too much detail here, but Six of Crows follows this cast of characters who go on this major heist. All I can say is I really like this, and I can't wait to go on with the next trilogy in the Grishaverse following a character called Nikolai. If you want to know more about the series, watch the vlog, link down below. Then I finally managed to finish Wuthering by Emily Brontë. This took me like 2 months to read because I only read like a chapter a day and not even always. If you don't know what Wuthering is about, it is a tragic love story between two characters, and that's really the main synopsis, and honestly, I didn't like this. And I think it's the problem for a lot of people with this book. It's just not very good. My main problem, and the first thing I actually wrote down as a comment on this book, was that I didn't understand one of the characters. He spoke completely indecipherable. I actually skipped over his dialogue because I just couldn't understand it, and it frustrated me majorly. All of the characters in this were despicable. There was not one likable character, and normally it doesn't really bother me, but this is a very long book for a classic, and I just couldn't deal with it anymore because no one had like one likable quality. The love story that took place between Catherine and Heathcliff repeated itself in the children later on, and was basically the same story all over again, and I didn't really need the same love story twice. Overall, it was a very frustrating book. There was literally no point to this entire story. There was no satisfying conclusion to all of it, and I feel like I wasted my time by reading this classic, honestly, and that's a major bummer. Then I moved on to a book by Colleen Hoover I have wanted to read for a while. It is called November 9th, and it follows two characters who meet each other on November 9th, and they decide to meet up each year on the same day and not see each other in between, and they establish a romantic relationship for that one day a year. It actually feels like I read this book so long ago and I didn't take any notes on it, so I barely remember anything about it. Like, I remember the story, but I don't remember anything I actually thought about it, which is kind of weird for me because I've never really had this. What I can say about it is that I enjoyed it. I gave it 4 stars. Wasn't my favorite Colleen Hoover book, but that's almost never the case anymore. Didn't live up to my expectations of her. It is one of her latest work and I still enjoyed it. It was very dramatic in true Colleen Hoover fashion, and I will probably continue to read Colleen Hoover's books forever. I read Stargirl by Spinelli on Lala's or Books and Lala's recommendation on her channel. I give it 3 stars. What Stargirl is about it's about a guy and a girl called Stargirl who has always been homeschooled, but her parents decide to put her into a high school, and she is actually a very weird person to all of these other high schoolers. She is very happy-go-lucky. She sings to people with a ukulele on their birthday in the cafeteria, and it's just not how high schoolers are supposed to act, and she gets bullied for that. I thought it was a very interesting story. It was written very beautifully, but I was so put off by the ending. I know there's a sequel to this book, but I just don't feel any inclination to read it because the story was enough for me, and I was just so frustrated that the whole story wasn't wrapped up in one book. I don't want to read a second book to know how these characters are doing. I just wanted this to be like a contemporary standalone and everything would be okay, and that just pissed me off a little, so I only gave it 3 stars. Then I read volume 9 in the Miss Marvel series called Teenage Wasteland. I was really looking forward to this volume because we would get to see more of the other characters instead of Miss Marvel, because Miss Marvel was gone from this volume for a little while, and I really enjoyed this one. I rated it 4 stars. What I really like about the Miss Marvel series is that it isn't just about a superhero, it also delves into these deeper moral questions and just deeper issues, and I can relate to it most of the time, and I really like that. I'm not for the superhero thing. I don't read these comics for the superhero elements to it or the action, because I don't really like that kind of thing, but I do read it for the deeper story behind it and the character dynamics, which I think are very interesting. Then I got to the 3rd book in the Wayfarer series called A Record of a Spaceborn View by Becky Chambers. This was a very interesting one, wasn't it? It kind of disappointed me, just like the second book in this series did. Nothing will ever live up to The Long Way to a Small Angry Planet, which I fell in love with when I read it back in the day. This follows completely different characters, not even side characters from the first book. It does follow the main character's sister, but we don't really see her in the first book. You could read this separately, but I would read the other books for some background information if you want to read this particular book. But there was no point to this book. That was my main problem. This series has always been very character focused, but it annoyed me particularly in this book that just nothing happens. And I was waiting for a plot twist or something big to happen that all of the many characters in this book would react to, but it just didn't come. None of these characters are related to each other. Most of the book, they have their own separate storylines, and it stays that way at the ending. So the character storylines just cross a little, but not a whole lot. And I don't like that in books. I feel like character stories have to intertwine, because why are you writing a book about all of these different characters together if they have nothing to do with each other, you know? They all have the different storylines going on. So it follows Tessa, who is the sister of Ashby from the first book, and she chose to stay home when Ashby left, and it follows her story with her kids. And it follows a guy called Kip who is bored with his life. He's a teenager and he wants to make a change. And then it follows another guy called Sawyer, who is a lost newcomer to this same world that the other characters are on. And it follows all of these characters, and again, nothing really happens. It was just these character stories. I didn't particularly care for the characters, so they didn't do anything for me. Then I read another Colleen Hoover book called All Your Perfects, which I think is her newest release. I also rated this one 4 stars. And it's about these two characters who are married to each other, but they have started to resent each other over the years. And it's an exploration of how they try to save their marriage or eventually break up. Again, very dramatic, but I really like this book. I had a great time reading this book, although I did read some trigger warnings before I started this book, so I will throw those trigger warnings in here too. For depression, there is a self-harming scene in here, which as soon as I knew there was a self-harming scene going in there, and I just can't stand self-harming. That is the one thing I cannot read about. And as soon as I noticed that the self-harming scene was coming on, I just skipped right over it. There was one scene in here, and it's pretty clear it's with glass, so as soon as you start like talking about glass, I felt like it might be worth it to read the book anyway, and I definitely do not regret it. I felt like it was a very heartbreaking, devastating read that stays with you. It definitely had an emotional impact, made me feel a whole lot of things, but it might be a little dark for some other people. So I would think about that and consider that. Maybe read some reviews on Goodreads before you go into this book. Then I read the first book in the Honor series, which is called Honor Among Thieves, which I thought was going to be a duology, but apparently it's going to be a trilogy, and the book is not even out yet. Which I'm kind of pissed off about, because I expected this to be a finished duology. But oh well, I still want to continue on with this series. I am not DNFing it. The first book reminded me quite a lot of The Long Way to a Small Angry Planet. It follows a character who gets picked in this lottery to go on a sentient spaceship with another person. The sentient spaceship needs to have a lot of preparation and stuff, with the help of his 2-people crew, to get ready for a thing they call the journey, which no one really knows anything about except for the people who go on the journey, but they never really come back from the journey. So yeah, that's very terrifying, and our main character doesn't really want to be on this sentient spaceship. She doesn't really think it's a particular honor or anything. She is not interested, but she has to go anyway. So she does, and she forms this bond with the ship. This book was super interesting. I don't think I've ever really read anything like it. I've obviously read about AIs and that kind of stuff, but this was something else entirely. It's a book by Rachel Caine, which I have read books from before, and I actually DNF'd a previous series of hers. And by Aguirre, I don't really know how to pronounce her last name. But the series is written by 2 female authors, and I think they did really great on the world building part of it. I really liked how our main character, when she touched the inside of the ship could feel it, and she could feel it, and there was some kind of bond going on in there. Like, the inside of the ship was actually its body, and it could feel stuff happening, and it had veins inside, like a real anatomy. And I thought that was really interesting to read about. Then I moved on to a series that I've wanted to start for a little while now. The series is called Gone, just like the first book by Michael Grant. I read the Soldier Girl series by Michael Grant, and I really loved that one. So I thought I would give his previous series, Gone, a try, which is a 6-book or 7-book series. And I really enjoyed this first book. It is probably said to be on the younger spectrum of the young adult genre. I didn't really notice any of that because the book was so dark. I really thought it was going to be younger, more like to the middle grade range, but it wasn't. It was super dark. I definitely would not recommend this for middle grade children because some really fucked up things happen in this book. And I thought that was super interesting. I really liked all of the characters. Didn't even tell you the synopsis yet. If you don't know what Gone is about, it follows a group of teenagers under the age of 15. And what happens is they're sitting in a classroom and suddenly their teacher disappears. They go on to figure out that everyone over the age of 15 has suddenly disappeared, and they're in some kind of dome or bubble, and they cannot leave their town. They have to find a way to survive. And I really liked the ending, how fucked up some of the characters were, how good some of the other ones were, trying to fend for themselves. Also the multi-perspective thing of this story, I thought that was done really well. You go from one character to another character, it never gets dull, you're always in the middle of the action, and I cannot wait to continue on with this series. This is definitely a series I am excited to see what is going to happen, because the whole premise hasn't been resolved in the first book, which I was scared about. Because I like my stories to have like a full-on story in the first book, but this series definitely did that. And it had a whole full completed story in the first book, but I'm still excited to read on, and the premise isn't done yet, but I am not even mad about that because it was a full story, you know what I'm saying? So yeah, I don't know what the second book is about, but I definitely want to continue on with this. I do not see where Michael Grant is going to take this series, but I have a very good feeling about it. And the last book I managed to read just at the cusp of the 30th of April. The book was actually on my May TBR, but I managed to finish it in April. And that book is called Release by Patrick Ness, which is a contemporary standalone. It follows two perspectives, a guy called Adam who is gay and has to deal with not telling his parents about it, because they're very Catholic. He feels like they won't really accept him. And the other perspective is a murdered girl. It's very lyrically written. It's about her ghost basically going through all of these other characters and confronting the guy who has murdered her, and it just felt very weird. I still, after finishing the book, do not understand how these two perspectives intertwined with each other. They do encounter each other at the end of the book, but they still don't have anything to do with each other. They just mention each other in passing, and it's just a very weird thing. I didn't understand it. I didn't understand the general message. I did like Adam's story, and it was okay, but it just flowed along and nothing really happened. It was kind of a little boring, and I didn't understand the girl's perspective entirely, so I feel like that could have been cut out, or maybe a different book or something. I didn't like the way it was written either, so I could have just skipped that because it had nothing to do with Adam's story, which is so weird. This wasn't a book I would recommend. I would recommend basically any other book by Patrick Ness, because he's an author I have read most of his works, and this was definitely not the one I would recommend, and certainly not as your first book to read by him, because it won't give you the right impression. So these were all of the books I managed to read in April. Let me know down below whether you've read any of these books, or what have you read in April. I would love to know. Thanks for watching!